What's going on, guys? It's Lord Saint, and finally, finally, we're getting to discussions about the Shade House. I feel like it's been long awaited. There have been tons of questions, and it's not that I've been gatekeeping or anything, just haven't had the time. And finally, I have a day where I can sit here and we can quickly get into what it took to build this shade canopy or shade house, however you'd like to call it. So first and foremost, I'm from South Florida. I live in South Florida. So shade houses are pretty much crucial for me, right? I had a greenhouse with nice plastic panels on the outside, and I cooked plants. I literally cooked plants. And I started realizing that why reinvent the wheel? South Florida is as tropical as it's going to get in the States to mimic or replicate the natural environment of a lot of my tropical plants. So I went to the drawing board. And in that drawing board, I actually contacted a company. They made almost like orchid shade houses. And this company quoted me, I think initially, my initial build was going to be a 10 by 10. And that 10 by 10 was going to cost me $1,500 to house the amount of plants I had at the time. Now, obviously, since then, my collection has grown ridiculously. But at the time, 10 by 10, I was happy with it. This is the little plot of section of yard my wife would allow me to have. And I said, all right, I'm going to run with it. I wanted to move everything from the inside outside. So I looked at this price point of $1,500 and I said, no way. There's got to be a way I can build this, right? So obviously I looked at all their photos, their videos, and I said, no shot, man. I can build this, and I think I can do it for a third of the cost. So that's exactly what I did. And initially I looked at wood. I'm like, all right, wood's going to be what it is. And I have my plant mentor, Preston, thank you. He's like, listen, you want to stay away from wood. Over time, it's going to rot. You want to look for something a little more permanent that you only have to take down when you're prepared to take down, not when rot or some other factor forces you to take it down. So I said, yeah, that's probably a good idea. I just bought the house that I'm living in now, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to be here for the long haul, and maybe I need to go a different route. So I looked around and I said, what material can I get? What I know, I can go to a metal, but where am I going to get this metal? What's it going to be? And I looked around my yard and I said, oh my gosh, I've got chain link fence surrounding my yard. And I looked at my chain link fence and I said, top rail, right? Literally the top rail of my chain link fence is what my shade house is supported by. That's the frame of my shade house. It's top rail. Now, you can also look at carports, things of that nature that come pre-built. I didn't like the cone style only because I didn't know, where I was going to get fabric to cover that extra surface area that I would need to for that style of a structure. And I wanted something I could more custom build to what I have, and that would be visually appealing. So I said, all right, I'm going to use the top rail. All right, and top rail is about 1 3/8, right? That's the size of top rail, generally, right? So I went to local fencing companies and I said, hey, you have top rail. I went to Home Depot, I went to Lowe's, they had top rail, and I just played with the cost of the top rail, right? So the shade house that I have is about 8.5 feet tall, right? Generally, and the poles, right? These wooden poles that you see behind me, those are 8.5. Or those are 8 feet, right? I buy those in 8 feet strips or 8-foot strips. And so with that, I knew I wanted about 8.5. I wanted some give, right? Some definitely some area or room to play with as far as the height goes. So I said, 8.5 is a good height. So I went and shopped around for 10-foot top rail, and I found 21-foot top rail, which is just as good because I could buy a piece of top rail and I could literally cut it in half, and then I could have 2 pieces right there, right? So I did that. And my initial structure, like I said, was about a 10 by 10, right? That's 10 by 10 by 8.5 is what I was looking to do. 8.5 was perfect, which means, or that meant for me that I could bury, obviously, for support, I could bury some of, or the vertical supports of top rail that I was going to use for my frame. Now, this was important for me. I couldn't have just a freestanding or totally freestanding structure without any anchors, because this is South Florida and we do get hurricanes and the winds are ridiculous, and I couldn't afford to have my structure just topple over or fly off or whatever it is. So I buried the remainder of my top rail poles, or my vertical top rail poles, and I poured just a tiny amount of cement. Now there's several other things you can use to kind of anchor them in the ground, and I just buried it. My top rails vertical supports aren't and haven't gone anywhere. We've been through, I think, 2 possible hurricanes, right? Just missing South Florida, and not a budge in my shade house structure. So it definitely works, right? Now, it's not enough just to have the top rail as a frame, right? You have to connect your top rail. And what I used is I shopped around. I couldn't find anything. And then I thought back to my carport structures, and I looked at those, but everything was kind of angled and I didn't have the right supports. And then I found this fencing company online, Trident Fence, right? And I will post a link down below to Trident Fence. And I found all the joints that I needed. I found, 4-way joints, 3-way joints, couplers, any joint that I needed, I found to connect my pieces together, right? And it made it all fit, right? So I have my structure built now, and now I have to worry about the sun in South Florida, right? I'm not too worried about the rain. I know different soil mixes. I'd rather have the plants get rain. I didn't want to, completely, cover the structure with plastic and whatnot, and not have any rain be able to come through. So I knew I needed to just go for shade fabric, right? So I knew I needed to combat the sun down here, and didn't have any trees around the area where the shade house was built, right? I had a large tree, but I cut it down. It was a black olive tree, and it was going to do damage to the home in the long run, so I had to get rid of it. So I went shopping for shade fabric, right? And I went online initially, and I need a custom piece to fit just the top of my shade house. And I found a local vendor that sold pretty much custom pieces of shade fabric. And initially I was thinking, all right, I'm going to go with 50%. 50% should do well. And my plant mentor, Preston, again, talked me into going 73%. And I'm so glad he did. 50% would not have been enough for the harsh sun, or to protect a lot of my plants from the harsh sun down in South Florida. 73% is perfect, right? The videos that you see, the videos that I'm posting in here, I'm shooting right now at 73%. The sun isn't hitting directly over right now due to the time that I'm shooting this video. But when it's broad daylight, middle of the day, 12, 1, I can walk in here and it's noticeably different than when I'm outside of the shade house than when I'm inside. So it does a fantastic job. The plants are clearly happy with it, right? Everything's growing, but mainly I'm growing phylos, right? And deep behind me, way behind me, because this, and we'll talk about the length and sizing of my particular one, but deep behind me is where I have more of my anthuriums, where I doubled up on. I did a 70 on top of the 73% shade fabric. I went with like a 50% just on top of that area, and they seem to be happy with that. I'm not getting any burnt edges or anything on any of my anthuriums or my sensitive plants, or plants that need lower lighting. So that's what I'm using. I'm using 73% custom pieces of shade fabric, right? I'm not using any plastics, anything that that's going to stop rainfall from coming straight through. When it rains, my plants get watered. And we'll talk about my soil mix on a different video, and how long it's taken me to kind of find a soil mix for down here in South Florida, where every day it can rain, So my soil mix is definitely chunky. Actually, we've talked about it. I've talked about it with my good friends over at Perfect Choice. I will also make reference or link their video where we did talk about soil mixes specifically down here that we use in South Florida to grow a lot of our plants. So now we have what I used, 1 3/8 top rail. We have the shade fabric percentage that I use, 73% for down here in South Florida. Maybe where you are, you need a little less. Maybe you need more. I'm not sure. I don't know if you need more, but just know you can double up, or you can go higher in the percentage, whatever you find. But now we need to talk about watering, right? And I've built my outdoor area so it's pretty much self-sufficient. And I did it because I love to take vacations. I like to go out of the country. And when I do go, I'm out of the country for at least a week at a time. And I can't expect my wife, if I'm not traveling with her, or a neighbor or a friend, to come out here and know what they're doing to water my plants or care for my plants for me. So I wanted to make it as self-sufficient as possible. So I tapped right into my irrigation system. And I know what you're thinking. Oh no, the chemicals and whatnot, coming from. I didn't have to worry about that. My irrigation system pulls straight from the canal. So it's all canal water that I'm getting here, which, is a lot better than pulling off of well. I'm not getting any, tint or anything like that on any of my plants. The plants are growing healthy and happy out here. So whenever I water, I've zoned my irrigation system. So this shade area and this corner of or just outside this area, which is the front corner of my front yard, they get watered at the same time, right? They're in the same zone. So we'll just call it zone 1, right? So based on the season, based on the weather, I can electronically control when I water my plants. Now, generally, I do it twice a week. During the summer, I noticed I was doing it 3 times a week. Everything was drying out super quick in the summer. Obviously, the sun shifts, everything cooks a lot quicker, and they need water more. So I would do shorter durations of watering, but more consistent during the summer. And now I just do about twice a week. And I obviously fertilize low strength fertilizer once a week if I can, if not every 2 weeks for a lot of the plants out here. So I don't have to take a hose or manually water anything that's out here. The irrigation system pretty much does that for me. It does everything for me, right? The only thing that I do, and I noticed quickly when I built this shade, the shade house, is we see changes in the direction of the sun depending on the season, right? So during the summer, I was fine, right? Everything was pretty much top down. Everything was good. I had enough leeway and the width and length of my structure that the plants were okay. But then now I got into fall and the sun was hitting at a beautiful angle that was crisping some plants. So I knew I had to install curtains. So I did. I installed curtains. And the way I put my curtains was kind of a temporary solution, right? I put wire and I got more shade, custom-made shade fabric, and I just put it within the grommets and the loops, and I had a curtain, right? And now I could protect from the direction, whichever direction the sun came in. I have curtains that go along the outside of my shade house. So during the day when I'm not home or when it's middle of the day, my shade house is completely covered, right? It's all curtained, and obviously the top layer of 73% fabric on the top completely, right? So by 2 p.m. is generally when I come out here and I just open up and tie up all of the curtains, and I can sit out here like you see me doing right now, and I can enjoy the shade house, right? I normally or generally water my plants early in the morning, so by the time it's time for me to come out here and relax, whether it be when I wake up or later at night where I have the light bulbs set up all around, the LED color changing ones, I can sit here and I can enjoy the shade house, right? The plants have acclimated beautifully to it, right? It's South Florida. People ask, well, how do you grow your plants? How do you do? I'm like, I don't. I just put them out here and they do what they do, The only thing that I do have to focus on is the soil or soilless mix that I have them in, right? And I've gone more towards soilless due to the amount of rainfall or just, not being able to control the weather. I need to make sure that everything is fast draining. I rather have to water frequently than water too much and have everything go to rot, which is what I was experiencing up until recent, where I literally repotted I'm still in the process actually, repotting my entire collection into a more soilless mix, and we'll talk about soil in another video. So I'm trying to think of the questions you guys have. I went to Home Depot and I bought these mister heads that tap into the lines, and on my irrigation I have like a few sprinkler heads that I swapped out for, I think Orbit sells them. If you go online, Home Depot, Orbit sells these valves, and you can put just tubing. And actually, I have some here, right? This tubing, right? It's just enough for water to go through, and it has maybe eight. The ones that I have eight ports on them, and each port gets one of these. And on the other end, I attach a mister head, and that also helps me to make sure everything gets water when the irrigation system does go off. So it's a mix between your conventional sprinkler head and the misters that I have lined along the top of my shade house structure here, right? So we know what material I'm using, right? 73% fabric, chain link fence top rail that I get from tridentfence.com. We know how I water, which is tapped into the irrigation system, and where I'm pulling canal water, and the mister heads that I got from Home Depot. I believe they're Orbit. And that's how I keep the plants happy down here in South Florida, right? And you can custom build this, right? I decided to go about 10 by 10 at the time because I thought my collection, or silly me, I thought my collection was just going to be this 10 by 10 corner. And if you look, I've posted reels where it was just initially this 10 by 10 structure, and I was happy with it. I didn't even fill that structure halfway when I built it. And I was like, oh, this is great. I'm never going to go past this. This is all it'll be. Fast forward, now we're in 2023, and I've extended this. Last year, I extended the shade house. I believe before it was 10 by 10, I said. I extended it about 35 feet. So it's 10 by 45 feet now is my entire shade house, and I did it so that I have room for expansion if I felt I needed it, right? I'm still working on that with the wife, but if I do need to, run this a little longer, I can, right? I left it open so that I could join another, pretty much I could build another shade structure or shade frame, and I could connect it right over to this one. So I have planned for the future. I hope I don't need it. I'm not even close to filling this one, quite honestly. I have tons of shelf space from all the plants that I have. If you watch my video, I know it looks full, but it looks mainly full because I have easily over 35 plants growing vertically on 2x1 or 1x2 wood strips. So I don't use any moss. I really don't use. I have a few things that were originally on moss that are still growing on moss, but I use all just straight wood out here, and we'll talk about that on another video. Like I said, I just want to give you guys a little bit of insight onto my build, the website that I got my joints, what material I'm using, and how I water the plants out here. And I want you to know, if you go on Instagram and you check my highlights, you can see me going through it at the time, right? Me clearing the area, my flooring, all right? My flooring here is all drainage stone. It's all drainage stone. It was the most cost-efficient thing I could find, and I put it down, and I love it, right? A lot of the plants, like Monstera, that grow crazy aerial roots, or the plants that are floating, because my plants are floating on these wood strips back here, when they become too root bound, they'll throw out an aerial root, or roots will start coming out at the bottom of the pots, and they'll actually get into this drainage stone, and they'll thrive with roots going into the drainage stone. And I really won't know until I move it, or do a plant check and I inspect and I find long pieces of roots that are just navigating through the drainage stone that I have. So the drainage stone works for me. It's clean, it's white, the light bounces off of it, it's easy to maintain. Like I said, it's cost efficient. So that's how I built this shade house, right? Simple, and I'll include some pieces of video so you can see my joints, how everything looks. You can continue to see the progress of the shade house on Instagram, TikTok, and I'm hoping now this video was made for YouTube, which I've realized, okay, it may be a good way for me to store a longer video on, but that's how I grow, or that's the environment that my plants grow here in South Florida. I just built a shade house. and you don't need to pay anybody. You can build it yourself, because I built this one pretty much myself. I had a little bit of help from my wife when I needed to support something, but other than that, I built it myself, right? So it's very doable. If you have any questions, feel free to message me, DM me, ask me about the Shade House, and I'd be more than glad to share. Again, it's Lord Saint. My Instagram handle is Lord Saint. And TikTok, I'm on there as Lord Saint as well, and I will link those down below. I hope this was a little helpful. We'll talk next time. We'll do a part 2 and a part 3. I'll talk about the potting medium that I've gone to with, experimenting with the rain and climate down here at South Florida and growing the plants outdoor. And we'll move forward like that. I hope you enjoy my content, my plant photography, the reels on Instagram. I enjoy making them. I hope you laugh at them. And thank you for joining me in my first YouTube video. I hope to have time to make tons more, and we can discuss kind of what works for you and what works for me, right? Thanks for joining me, guys.